You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking to Professor M Dershowitz, who is a Brooklyn native, and now he's a professor at the law school at Harvard Law School. He's widely published from the New York Times to the Washington Post, shows up from time to time, I guess, in the Israeli journals as well, and has published widely. Professor, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Listen, I'd like to start with a question about the U.S. attitude towards Israel, specifically as it relates to the support that Israel has been getting for many years from the United States. Is this a healthy relationship?
Well, it's a misunderstood relationship. I think a lot of Americans who read the propaganda that Israel is the largest recipient of American aid and American largesse think that this is a one-way relationship, that Israel receives from the United States without giving back. They don't realize that what the United States does in relation to Israel is an investment, paid back handsomely with intelligence information, with sharing of military information, with the sharing of economic success. It's a true partnership and has been for many decades. You know, the difference is when the United States gives money to Jordan, it gives it to prop up a dictatorial monarchy, a regime that couldn't survive without American support. That is, it's designed essentially to prevent democracy from overcoming tyranny. The same thing was true in Mubarak's Egypt. The same thing is true in other parts of the world. Of course, when the United States gives money to Israel, none of that, not a single penny, goes for that purpose. Israel is a vibrant democracy, will always be, and will always essentially be a democracy in every possible aspect of that term. So the money goes for areas of mutual interest, defending Israel against terrorism, defending Israel against military attack, assuring the peace, making sure that Israel has qualitative military superiority. And a lot of the money that Israel gets comes back to the United States in the form of purchases of military weapons. There's mutual training. So I think it's widely misunderstood.
The money that comes back to the U.S., wouldn't that be considered the same thing as the U.S. government simply giving money to some of the large defense firms?
Well, indirectly, but of course Israel benefits as well from it. And so it's a complicated relationship. Of course, also a lot of the money, a lot of the value that Israel gets in the United States is loan guarantees. And today Israel's economy, for better or worse, is probably stronger in some ways than the United States is. I mean, if things continue the way they are, Israel's going to have to make loan guarantees to the United States as China reduces the value of the American credit, the American debt, and Israel, with its startup nation mentality, continues to have an economy that really is thriving. And so the nature of the relationship has changed certainly over the 63 years in which the United States and Israel have been joined at the hip in many ways as two twin democracies espousing very similar principles, both economically and politically. And it's changed particularly as Israel has moved toward becoming a free market economy, much like the United States, unlike the way it was at its origins. So, it's an ever-changing relationship.
One of the topics that is a little bit frightening, I guess, sometimes, is when the talk of boycott against Israel comes up, because obviously international trade is so important to us. Is that something that we should really be worried about, or is it more of the very loud fringe?
Well, it's something to be worried about always, mostly symbolically. Some people say the best thing that ever happened to Israel was the Arab boycott. which made Israel much more independent in many ways. I mean, it's impossible for the world to boycott Israeli products. It means they would have to do without cell phones, they would have to do without computers, they would have to do without many of the most innovative technologies in the world today. They would have to do without extraordinary medical devices and technologies. So nobody's really going to boycott all Israeli products. But we have to fight back. Just yesterday, there was a small co-op in Park Slope in Brooklyn that wanted to ban Israeli products. They only sell one, some hummus. Mm-hmm. But I took the lead in campaigning against it and threatening really to shut down this co-op if it becomes the first Brooklyn co-op to boycott Israel. I mean, this is a co-op that willingly buys from Cuba and China, and if they could, from Syria, from the most repressive regimes in the world. But Israeli hummus, forget about it. So it's important to take these boycott efforts seriously. As you probably know, when efforts were made to boycott Israeli universities by the British Teachers Union, we fought back and got 11,000 American professors to say, we are Israelis for purposes of any boycott. And if you boycott Israel, you're boycotting us. We will have nothing to do with your universities. And they backed down immediately because the end result would have been a boycott of mediocre British universities rather than a boycott of great Israeli universities that do so much good. But when I was in South Africa recently, Cape Town University cut off relations with an Israeli university, and that the Jewish community in South Africa is really not strong enough to fight against that kind of thing. So it needs the support of the American Academy in fighting these kinds of boycotts. And so the United States has to be at the forefront of fighting any attempt to selectively boycott Israeli products or Israel.
We are talking to Professor Alan Dershowitz, who is a professor of law at Harvard. He's been talking to us about the issue of the boycott. A lot of times, I think the hatred against Jews and Israel comes from an absolute lack of any information. Is it just popular to hate Israel and perhaps Jews, or is there something really more behind it?
No, there's much more behind it. First of all, many of the efforts to boycott Israel come from Jews. In the United States, the efforts are almost all generated by Jews. Oh. Jews like Norman Finkelstein, self-hating people that hate everything about Jews, Judaism, the Jewish nation. The same thing in England with a guy named Gilad Atzmon, a former Israeli who compares Israel to Nazi Germany. So a lot of it is generated by, in some instances, psychotic Jews, in some instances just hateful Jews. And these are not totally ignorant. These are worse. They know, and they distort and they lie. Some of it's ignorance. It's becoming less popular to support Israel among young people. That's partly the fault of organizations like J Street, which turn young people against Israel. J Street rarely has anything positive to say about Israel. It emphasizes only the negatives and focuses on the areas of disagreement among supporters of Israel. And so it's had an impact. To me, the most dangerous impact is on our children and our grandchildren, that young people who don't understand and who don't have the knowledge see that Israel is less popular than it was in my generation when I was growing up, and young people want to be popular, and so they become fair weather friends of Israel. If Israel does something bold and heroic, suddenly they're supportive, but if Israel does something that is criticized by the international community, suddenly they're ashamed and embarrassed. So, again, it's a work in progress that has to be addressed both by the Israeli government and by those of us who support Israel around the world, particularly in the United States.
With the difficulty in having a really good marketing arm as far as the Israeli government, in other words, in recent events it seems that we just never come out well in the press, what would you suggest normal people should do in order to try and really improve our face to the world?
I've for years argued that there is one step Israel can, I think, take, and it's refused to take up to now. Well, Jews invented public relations, invented the advertising industry in many ways. We are very good at it when it comes to selling our products, but we are not very good at it when it comes to making the case for Israel. part of the reason for that is that support for Israel within Israel is a political issue. And that is, there is no arm of the Israeli government whose job it is to support Israel. The job is to support the current government of Israel. And that's always going to be a problem, whether the current government is right, center, or left. I've argued for years that there ought to be a government agency within the office of the President of Israel, not the Prime Minister's office, not the Foreign Minister's office, not any part of the current government of Israel, but a neutral, objective campaign that is run to brand Israel and put forward its best case in a non-partisan or bipartisan or multi-partisan way. And it ought to be very, very well funded. It ought to be headed, where Israel is fortunate, it has a great president who is adored and respected around the world, and his office is the best office to make the case for Israel rather than the foreign ministry or any other governmental office. So that's something that's going to be a hard sell in Israel because everything is political, and it's very hard for any government agency to give up its power in this regard.
Do you think that the recent events in Norway and in Europe were classically rather anti-Israel, anti-Semitic? The terrorist activity that's been going on there is going to help to open their eyes to see what we're afraid of every day?
Absolutely not. The Norwegians are the most anti-Semitic, anti-Israel group of people, not only nation, but group of people in the world today, outside of the Arab and Islamic world, certainly in Europe. I spent some time there. I was banned from speaking by any of the major faculties of the universities. They didn't want to hear the case for Israel. They had heard enough from anti-Israel speakers. They were satisfied. It's the only country in Europe that bans kosher slaughter. Its former prime minister complained when Barack Obama appointed a Jew to be his chief of staff, not an Israeli, a Jew to be his chief of staff. The language that's used in Norway is beyond anything that's used anywhere else in Europe today. It's a country that has just closed its mind. The Norwegian ambassador to Israel made an absolute fool of himself and of his country by trying to distinguish the terrorism in Norway from the terrorism directed against Israel, essentially saying that the terrorism directed against Israel is Israel's fault and is justified, whereas the terrorism directed against Norway was focused on Norwegian culture. The Norwegians, at this point in time, are beyond learning any lessons from the horror that struck them recently. Fortunately, Norway is a marginal country with very little influence in the world today. You think of what Israel has accomplished in 63 years. Israel and Norway are essentially the same. Israel has a slightly larger population, significantly smaller land mass, and significantly fewer natural resources. Name a Norwegian who has contributed to the world today. Norway has not contributed. Israel has contributed enormously, and so I wouldn't say I've given up on Norway, but I think Norway is at the margins today, and Israel is much more at the center of what's going on in the world. Israel ought to be very proud of its accomplishment, so Norway ought to be ashamed.
Okay, that is quite a good conclusion. We have been talking to Professor Alan Dershowitz from Harvard University, a frequent commentator in the news, as well as a very active author. Professor Dershowitz, thanks so much for spending the time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt show.